This conference will now be recorded.
Thanks, Ben. If your full name is not listed in as your login there, could you please type into the chat your name and affiliation, just so we know who's on. Looks like there might be 3 people on the phone and some initials, PW. Other than that, it looks like most people have their full name listed. And feel free to just say hi in the chat there too, if your affiliation isn't listed there with your name. So we're gonna mostly just quickly step into the state climatologist report, but the big announcement today is that at some point later this afternoon, there's going to be a press release that goes out to the state and everyone on this call. I'm sure you're already on the listserv to announce the activation of the drought plan by the governor for 40 counties in Colorado. So we can talk more about that after our standard updates here and maybe what that means for next steps for this group. So I'm just going to hand it off to Becky to start. And just a reminder for everyone, if you are not, if you do have a question, just mute your mic, and I will monitor the chat in the meantime. I'm not sure if you're talking, Becky, but can't hear you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Does everything look okay on the screen for you?
Yes.
Okay, you caught me. I was still finishing a slide, so we're going to get to a slide and it's going to be like half
Oh, that's fine.
So the true scientist way, I'm finishing this up at the very last second. So go ahead and get started. I am Becky Bollinger. For those who don't know, I am the Assistant State Climatologist for Colorado, and I'm at the Colorado Climate Center. Without further ado, we're going to get started right off and talk about the 2020 water year to date. So from October 1st through now, what things have been looking like with temperature and precipitation, standardized precipitation index around the state. So here's a look at some of the rankings for temperature. These come from NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information. Every month they do a ranking for out of their 126-year record right now of how warm or cold, wet or dry each state has been. So May came in at 9th warmest, which is much above average. And the table on the right, you can see how each month has ranked for this water year. So we did have a couple of cool months in there, but mostly it's been above average, and May was definitely warm, as was March. This is looking at how the temperatures have looked across the state for the spring. We officially define spring as March, April, May. Sorry, I had a webcam video thing pop up on my app, got in the way. Okay, so March, April, May is officially defined as spring, and this is kind of taking a look back at what our spring temperatures look like, and it gives them a little bit of a percentile ranking. So if you are in the yellow, it's one of the top 33 percentile rankings for temperatures, meaning that out of 100 years, 67 of them would be colder and only 33 would be warmer. And then if you get into that orange, you're in the top 10 ranked warmest year or warmest springs. So almost all of the western half of the state had a very warm spring in that top 10 ranking. And most of it was in that warmer top 33 percentile, except for the northeastern corner of the state, which came in a little bit closer to normal with a slight cool spot in there. man. This is if we just look at May and what happened through May, doing the same percentile ranking. And as you can see from our very warm May, there were spots that came in as record warmest, especially around the San Juan Mountains and in the southwest corner of the state, and even up to the Grand Mesa, though over there on the west slope. All of western Colorado showing up much warmer than average. Most of the Front Range and part of the southeast coming up as warmer than average, and that near normal signal showing up in the northeast corner again. So that's through May. What has happened since the beginning of June? Most of the state has seen much warmer than average temperatures, but there's a bit of a switch. Instead of the focus on the western side of the state, now we're seeing that focus on the eastern side of the state. So where you see the red color from June 1st to June 21st has been an average 6 to 8 degrees warmer. So incredibly warm on the eastern plains. And we're going to talk about that warmth a little later too. Now we're going to switch to precipitation and look at the same types of maps where we're looking at the ranking of precipitation for each state. So May came in as 18th driest, which is below normal. That was following kind of an average March, and April coming in as the 8th driest, which was much below normal. So we've had some wetter times in there, but recently we've had a lot more dry than wet, unfortunately. This is what it looked like around the state as a percent of normal. And the tough thing about May is that it's really a bread and butter month for a lot of the eastern half of the state, where we expect to get a significant chunk of precipitation. And we did okay in some areas, as you can see up in the northeast corner around Sedgwick. We got a couple of decent events around Washington County, and a little bit near normal there, but most of the state comes in at below normal. And the areas of concern are along the west slope, and especially down in the southwest corner, where even though they do start to normally dry out in May, they really struggled in May, and that was following a very dry April as well. And in the southeastern corner of the state, also very dry, and around the San Luis Valley as well. So a lot of concerning situations popping up throughout the month of May. If we extend that out to look at the entire water year, so October through May around the state for precipitation, you can see the large area of northern Colorado showing up as near average to a little bit above average. We had a pretty good showing of snowpack, consistent snowpack throughout the year up north, which helped the precipitation stay near normal. And then as you move south, it just gets a little bit drier. And from the water year map, you can tell that the driest parts in the state really pop out in the southeast corner and the San Luis Valley. This is what we're looking at since the beginning of June, just actual precipitation totals from June 1st through June 21st. So a lot of the green colors, everywhere you see green, has gotten at least a half an inch to an inch since the beginning of the month. A little bit darker green is even better, because it means those areas have gotten at least 1 inch or more of precipitation. We have a couple of spots around the high elevations in the San Juans indicating they might have gotten 2 inches or more. And then some of those dry spots that pop out in Delta Montrose County and some of the southern counties that have gotten less than a 1/4 inch in some areas. We're going to shift to talking about the Standardized Precipitation Index. For those who are unfamiliar with that, Standardized Precipitation Index is a way to look at the precipitation over a certain time period and how abnormal it is. So if you see greens and blues, it's abnormally wet, a Standardized Precipitation Index. And if you see the yellows, reds, maroons, that's very abnormally dry. And it's not really a linear scale. It's almost the more dry it gets, it's kind of like the Richter scale for an earthquake. It it is more greatly concerning the more negative that number gets. So as we're looking at caller number. Okay, we're continuing on. So this is looking at the last 30 days SPI, and we see some greens in there and a lot of grays, and grays means they're falling in that near average category. And then where we're seeing the most dryness over the most recent 30 days is on the eastern plains of Colorado, and everywhere else it's a little bit closer to normal with some wet spots. As we extend out to the 90 days, we start to see a lot more dryness. We still see some grays in there, which is good. That's in that near normal range. But we're starting to see a lot more of the oranges, which is much drier than average and definitely concerning. And then where we see the reds and maroons is very dry for that 90-day SPI. We go out to the 6 month and we see somewhat similar to what we saw with the water year percent of average for precipitation, where northern Colorado spots start to look a little more closer to normal, but a lot of the rest of the state is really dry, particularly on the eastern plains and down around the San Juans and upper Rio Grande. And the most depressing map is when we extend out to that 1 year, going back to June of 2019 through June 20th of 2020. As you can see, there are a lot of red and maroon dots, which is extremely dry. So that southwest corner of the state down into the San Luis Valley, very extremely dry over the last year. If we go on to the eastern plains, a lot of concerning spots. A little bit of a mixed bag over northern Colorado. Some areas doing okay. Some are starting to show a little bit of drying out. So that's a good transition to start talking about drought. I'll give you kind of a look at the national drought picture. We'll focus in on Colorado. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about flash drought that we've been seeing some flash drought type conditions lately. So this is the map as of last week. So a new map will be released this Thursday, but last Thursday the release came out, and you can see that some of the most concerning drought situation is focused right over Colorado. So we'll zoom right in on that. And the table on the right tells you how much of the state is in each category of drought. The yellow is an abnormally dry category. So you don't officially enter a drought category until you get to the orange or the peach, which is D1. So everywhere that there's peach, orange, red is a drought category, and almost 66% of the state is in a drought category. And that red is D3 extreme drought, which is a very bad drought category to be in. The only worst one is D4. Which could be in our near future if we don't see some relief very soon. And currently we have about 33% of the state in D3 drought, mostly over southeast Colorado, along the Arc Valley, down into the San Luis Valley, and over into the western part of the state. These are the changes that we've seen over the U.S. Drought Monitor for the last 2 months. So if you go from a D0 to a D1, that's a 1 category change. If you go from a D1 to a D3, that's a 2 category change. Most of the state has seen a 1 category deterioration in drought conditions over the past 2 months. So that's comparing back to April 21st. We have had a little bit of minor improvements showing up in the northeastern corner, but I think it's kind of a precarious position. I think for the most part, we're going to see drought conditions up there too. But for certain parts of the state, if you see that orange and the darker orange, these are areas that have seen 2 to 3 category deteriorations in the past 2 months. So this brings us to the idea of flash drought, and I want to briefly explain what a flash drought is for those of you who are unfamiliar. It's still a very new term for even the climatologists and drought community. We're still trying to figure out the idea of a flash drought is kind of similar to if you say flash flood versus flood. Flooding is something that's a little longer term, while flash flood is something that happens in an individual event really quickly. And flash drought, while it's not as fast as a flash flood, it's faster than a regular drought. And the reason is because a regular drought is primarily driven by those precipitation deficits, and a flash drought, you're adding on that you're losing more moisture from the ground and the surface than you normally would. So you have your precipitation deficits, but if you also have really hot temperatures, high winds, low relative humidities, they're going to be stripping the soils of any remaining moisture really quickly, leading to what could be considered a flash drought situation. Now, the difference, what we're seeing here is that we were already in drought. So I don't know if we can call this a flash drought, because usually it's the beginning of a drought, but I would call this sort of a flash event or an ET, evaporation event, what we've seen over the past few weeks. We've heard a lot of reports from the Eastern Plains about just brutal winds, hot temperatures, and we can definitely see that when we look at the data. So this is looking at a product called EDDI, which is the Evaporative Demand Drought Index, and it kind of gives a good indication of if you're seeing a flash drought type situation. So it's looking at, for each location, is the evaporative demand much greater or much less than it normally is this time of year? So we always expect evaporation to be occurring, but are we seeing a lot more evaporative demand than what we normally see? And if you look at the map on the left, the 1 week ending June 17th is saying that yes, for all of Colorado, we're seeing more evaporative demand than what is typical for this time of year. And on the Eastern Plains in particular, we're seeing near record evaporative demand that wants to kind of take any available water and just put it right back up in the atmosphere. And so this definitely exacerbates the situation from precipitation deficits, extending all the way out to a 1 month ending in June 17th. And we're seeing a similar story that over the entire 1 month period, we're having a higher evaporative demand, and particularly located over the Eastern Plains of Colorado. To show how rapidly this has changed, I'm looking at a map of how the EDDI categories have changed over the last month. I know there's a lot of brown over the Great Lakes region in Canada, and I'm not sure what's driving that. So I really just want to focus you now to look at Eastern Colorado, and that we have seen very swift changes in evaporative demand over the last 30 days. So categories of evaporative demand have quickly decreased by 3, 4, even 5 categories, which can definitely indicate a flash drought type event. And you can look at all these maps at that link that's in that upper right-hand corner there if you're interested. So let's go to one of our coagmet stations. We maintain about 90-something stations around the state at our agricultural sites, and we do this to kind of monitor reference ET. What reference ET is looking at the amount of evapotranspiration you have off of a crop, assuming that it has the water there to evaporate, how much would evaporate. And so this is looking at Idalia, Colorado, in far eastern Colorado. Each day, what was the reference ET, and compare that to what their long-term average is for that day. So the maroon line, or the maroon bar, shows what it actually was this year, and the orange bar shows what it typically is for this time of year. And for almost every day, you can see that the ET has been much higher than average. June 9th, we had a nice, cool, rainy event, so that's why that day shows up as below average. But check out June 7th. almost 0.8 of an inch of reference ET compared to a normal of about 0.3 of an inch. So almost a half an inch more of loss than normal. And on that bottom time, those bottom lines show the accumulation over time since June 1st. Just looking at June 1st, we have an accumulation of 2 inches greater than average of ET losses. So imagine you have an area with precipitation losses over the springtime. We're looking at precipitation deficits of 2 to 4 inches in the Eastern Plains. Add on to that an additional 2-inch potential loss from the ground and soils, and you can see how it can dry out even quicker than normal than just from a precipitation deficit. And what this means is that really strips the soils of the moisture that's there. This comes from the USDA. They have statistics that they put out every week for each state. And what we're looking at is the percent of the state that has short to very short topsoil moisture. Short to very short meaning there is not much moisture in that soil. And as of last week, we increased to 75% of the state having short to very short topsoil moisture. And that was a 12% increase from the week before. So that is the response to that huge uptick in evaporative demand. And what this does is it further puts stress on the vegetation in our state. So this is looking at a satellite product that estimates the color of the vegetation, the health of the vegetation around the state, and also uses precipitation as a guide, a sort of ground truth around the state. So anywhere where you see those yellows, oranges, and reds means the vegetation is much drier and much more stressed than it normally should be this time of year. And most of our state is showing that vegetation stress. And I want to show you how this flash drought event differs from what's been happening on the west slope. So this is looking at the accumulation of evaporative demand at our Burlington site in eastern Colorado. So the blue line shows how evaporative demand has been increasing or accumulating over time for the growing season. And the black line is what is average for an average growing season. And then the red line is the maximum, which is 2012, which probably pops up pretty well in a lot of people's memories. So the blue line was just a little bit above average for most of May, not really too bad. And then you can see how that blue line really diverges from the black line as we go into June. And that's really showing that huge uptick in evaporative demand. And the graph on the right is a water balance. So you're taking the difference between the evaporation and the precipitation. And because we always have higher potential evaporation than we do precipitation, it's most always going to be negative. But the black line is what is typical, and the blue line is where we are. And we've really dive bombed and getting close to that minimum water balance year of 2002. Now heading over to the west slope, this is at Olathe, and we're looking at record high evaporative demand for almost the entire growing season. So on the left, we're seeing that blue line really coming close to the red line and staying with that red line. So what that means is we haven't seen a short-term upswing in June like we did in the Eastern Plains, but on the west side of the state, we've been seeing consistently high evaporative demand for all of the growing season. So it's a little bit different, but also still a very concerning situation. As you can see, the graph on the right showing the water balance at Olathe is really at that record low water balance, even lower than what we saw in 2018. So both places are very concerning, but also telling very different stories. So what do we have going forward? Let's look at the next 7 days And here we're looking at the total accumulation of precipitation we're expecting over the next 7 days for the region. Areas in blue could possibly see 1/2 inch or more of precipitation. We're not seeing a lot for western Colorado and the Four Corners, which is pretty typical for this time of year. And then a little bit more widespread over eastern Colorado. But my guess is that for some areas, it's going to be a lot more spotty, like not the entire region is going to see that widespread 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. It's really going to be where that whatever line of thunderstorms goes through and hits, and it's probably going to, again, miss some areas. The 8 to 14 day outlook goes from the end of June through early July. The map on the left is the temperature tendency. So where you see blue, they're expecting a better chance for cooler than average, and where you see the red, a better chance for warmer than average. We have a near normal signal showing up over western Colorado, and more likely to have above normal temperatures continue on the eastern half of our state for the beginning of July. And looking on the right at the precipitation outlook, greens are showing areas that are leaning more towards slightly wetter than average. It's just a very slight signal, not very confident. So I would almost say it's just really depending on where you're standing at the moment, whether you're going to see near average precipitation or above average or even below average for early July. Going to extend out to the seasonal outlook, and sorry to provide something a little bit more depressing again, but this is looking at July, August, September, and what are we expecting for temperatures and precipitation. On the left, temperature, as you can see, almost the entire country showing up as very likely to be warmer than average temperatures. They're really confident on that at the Climate Prediction Center right now. It's been a pretty consistent forecast that they've been putting out, and we can expect to see that over a lot of Colorado, especially over the Four Corners, unfortunately. The map on the right, precipitation, is showing a slight leaning towards drier than average. The signal is stronger up to in the northern Rockies, in Idaho and Wyoming, but does extend a little bit down to us. But right now there's a lot of uncertainty what we're looking at, and Climate Prediction Center really doesn't have any clear ideas yet of what we're going to be seeing from the monsoon, how strong it's going to be, when it's going to start, how far north it's going to get. We're not really getting a lot of signals on that right now. One of the reasons we're not getting a clear signal on it is from the El Nino forecast. So right now, our sea surface temperatures in the tropical Pacific are borderline La Nina conditions, which means they're very slightly cooler than average. But the atmospheric response to that is a lot closer to a neutral condition, which means we don't really have a lot of information to go by. The outlook is for a continuation of this neutral category through the summer, and then kind of equal chances of if it's going to be neutral in the fall or maybe a weak La Nina. So the bar graph on the left shows the likelihood, the probability of each category. So you can see it's pretty equal between that blue and the gray, which is La Nina or neutral. And then the one on the right shows all the individual models. And when they dip below the -5, that would be a La Nina. If they stay between +0.5 and -0.5, that's neutral. So you can see why there's a lot of uncertainty. The models aren't giving us a lot to go on. So the bad news for our water year is that there are some areas that are just not going to recover their precipitation deficits from that they built up for this water year. This is the example from Walsh, which is in southeast Colorado. The black solid line shows how precipitation has accumulated there since October 1st. The gray dashed line is what a normal accumulation would look like. So as of June 22nd, they're at 40% of average. And you can see that's about a 6-inch deficit, a little bit more than a 6-inch deficit from where they should be this time of year. And from there, there's a bunch of light gray lines, and those are all the historical years and what has happened since June 22nd at Walsh going to the end of the water year. And pretty much all examples except for 1 year, we could get to average precipitation. All the rest of the examples are that we would end the year at below average precipitation. If we got average precipitation for the rest of the water year, follow that green dashed line, we would end the water year at 67% of average. So it's going to be a pretty big deficit likely at Walsh. And this is going, moving west into the southwest corner of the state at Mesa Verde. And as you can see there, they're at 53% of average, also about a 6-inch deficit there. And even with a strong showing of the monsoon, they're very unlikely to get to average. In fact, all the historical runs show that they could not get to average based on how much precipitation they usually get between now and the end of the water year. So this was the slide I was working on and didn't finish. Sorry about that. I had put in an email to somebody in Arizona to ask him about the monsoon. So I'm going to just tell you what I've heard, and then I'll add it to the slides. So when I send Ben the slides, he'll have the total story later. So as I said before, ENSO is not really giving us a clear picture of what could happen. There's another thing they look at called the Madden-Julian oscillation that could give some indication of what the monsoon would do. And right now, they're not really getting any information from that either. So I did talk with a forecaster in Arizona, and he said that he did see some indication that the subtropical high that builds up and starts that pattern could be moving up over the area as early as July 4th, and that some of the models are indicating that that could be the start of it, which would really be for areas in southern Arizona and New Mexico. But as soon as it starts there, then we can start looking at when might it possibly come up towards our area. We did hear some recent research back in May that showed if you had a strong transition from neutral conditions to La Nina conditions, that the transition is very quick and strong, that it could make the monsoon much stronger for southern Arizona, but not have it extend up into our region. So we don't want to root for a strong transition from neutral to La Nina, because that would really keep the monsoon limited to the south. But other than that, we don't have too much information on the monsoon arrival at this time. So just a quick summary of everything I went over. With spring, the spigot shut off and the heat turned on. Most of the areas of the state have been struggling with dry conditions ever since. Drought has expanded in the last month, and now 33% of the state is currently in extreme drought conditions, which is D3. We have seen an ET event occur in June over the eastern plains, kind of consistent with a flash drought, except we're already in drought, so what it's done is just made that drought even worse. We can expect warmer than average temperatures to continue. The monsoon hasn't started yet, but we're hopeful for a solid start in Arizona around the 4th maybe, and then we'll keep watching and see where it goes from there. And recovery before the end of the water year is very unlikely for southeast and southeast Colorado. So for a lot of those areas, we're really just kind of hanging tight and holding on until the start of the next water year and hope that that's better. That's all I got, unless there are any questions.
That was awesome. Thank you, Becky. Does anyone have any questions for Becky after that very, very thorough, awesome presentation? You are also welcome to type some questions into the chat, and we can get to those after if they pop in your head, or feel free to unmute yourselves now. And we can then transfer the presentation or controls to the next presenter. Thank you, Becky. That was really helpful. It was pretty much taking word for word notes the entire time. So.
Well, thank you, Megan.
Yeah. All right. Brian is on deck.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I need to change the screen. I accidentally put it on the backup screen. You can't see my notes when I give the presentation. You'd know what I was going to say. Let me see if I can change this. There we go. Okay. Again, good morning, everybody. My name is Brian DeMacos, and I am going to be giving the snow and mountain precipitation portion of the update on conditions here, if you haven't been to any one of these meetings before.
Hey, Brian,
Right.
I do not see your slides yet.
You don't see anything at all? Did I relinquish?
Let's see.
Did you see anything at all?
I don't. Ben, do you?
It had shown up at first, but now it's not.
Yeah, it's gone away for now. There we go, Brian. I see it now.
Okay, great. Let me try this. Thank you guys for letting me know.
Mm-hmm. Well, that might show your notes, but we're okay if you read from them.
Yeah, I was being facetious earlier. Okay, now I think we should be on the right slide.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you again. Alrighty. Now if I can get it to move. Okay, I think at this point we're all aware that snowpack this year was normal to slightly above normal in most of the basins, slightly above normal in the northern basins. So I won't hang out too long on these snowpack slides. I will say, please be a little careful looking at the values that show up on some of these. They are incorrect. The current percent of normal snowpack here in the Yampa White is not really 18%. I think we're very, very close to zero there. Tower might have a little bit of snow left. But there were some bounces in the data over the last few days that got captured. So they are unfortunately showing up as little bumps in the data, and I'll point them out real quick, but snowpack is largely melted out. Precipitation in the Yampa White Basin through May was only 62% of normal, and unfortunately through June it's been 29% of normal. According to the mountain snow-tell stations in the Yampa White. And here you can see that there are a number of sites, most particularly in the eastern part of the North Platte, that did get good precipitation since the beginning of June. But I will transition back. Please note that this graph is just for the Yampa and the White. It does not include the locations in the North Platte there, especially specifically on the southern and eastern North Platte. So those numbers are only capturing, the numbers in the previous graph are only capturing these sites here. That's why you're not seeing the influence of these. The North Platte did wind up a little bit better. Again, back to just the Yampa and the White. Precipitation as of yesterday morning, according to the snow-tell stations, was 91% of normal. Here is a perfect example of a little bump. We probably have a site or two that were misreporting ever so slightly for whatever reason. And you can pretty much smooth this line out maybe because precipitation using our sensors does not go down. So we probably haven't seen much of an increase there over the last few days. Streamflow forecast based on that June 1 data were okay. For the Little Snake and the North Platte Basin, the white a little less, not so okay. You can see a number of the stream flow forecasts were near 100% normal. The Yampa at Steamboat and the Yampa above Stagecoach were both 100 now. The other ones were in the 90s or the 80s, one in the 70s, and then you go to the White River near Meeker was 67% of normal for June 1st, which is the last stream flow forecast revision that we provide for 2020. Okay, moving on into the Colorado. Here again, this is why I was cautioning using these numbers here. Snowpack is not 733% of normal. Snowpack is pretty much melted out there, so there's really nothing to report there. It's just a little bump in the data. But again, snowpack in the Colorado, snowpack peak was good at slightly above normal. May precipitation through, all the May precipitation, according to the SNOTELs in the upper Colorado is 52% of normal, and June to date, which was yesterday morning, was 83% of normal. And here you can see the distribution of sites and the precipitation they've received since January 22nd, or excuse me, since January 1st through the 22nd. You can see that there were a number of sites in the southern portion of the basin that received slightly better precipitation for the month. And then here's the year to date in the Colorado is 87% of normal year to date precipitation. Stream flow forecasts were generally okay in the Blue River, but elsewhere in the basin they kind of tailed off. Again, we have in the upper part of the basin 90s or 90 forecast in the 90s and a few in the 80s, but then tailing off the further down basin you go. Combined reservoir storage in the Colorado is above normal at this point, so that's good, and it has been trending upward, but I'm assuming that's in anticipation of some of these lower flows that we're already seeing and will be seeing, provided we don't get more precipitation. Here we go, South Platte, 0% of normal, or technically there's just no snowpack left in the South Platte Basin. South Platte precipitation through May was 58% of normal, and fortunately in June so far we've had 114% of normal, according to the SNOTEL stations. And here you can see there's definitely been weather favoring or precipitation favoring the southern portion of the basin, where the central and central northern portion of the basin has seen slightly below normal precipitation, but nonetheless a welcome sight after these last 2 months, and especially when you compare to the Yampa White and even portions of the Colorado. Year-to-date precipitation in the South Platte is very close to normal at 98, and arguably the best in the state. Streamflow forecasts dropped. I would argue they dropped significantly from May 1 to June 1. Probably largely based on the precipitation or lack thereof in May. You can see that even the upper basin stays below normal, below that even the 80% mark. However, Clear Creek does have a forecast of 86% of normal. And then here, good to see that combined reservoir storage in the South Platte, as we've heard from a lot of our providers over the previous months, that reservoir storage is or has been in pretty good standing. It'll be interesting to hear what they have to say here going forward with the stream flow forecast and the dry May that we had. Okay, moving on into the Gunnison, snowpack peak was slightly below normal here, and again, snowpack is melted out. May precipitation was only 36% of normal in the mountains. However, June to date, looking pretty good at 138. We have to keep in mind, of course, that average precipitation in the mountains during June is about 1.5 inches. From June 1st through June 22nd, the average precipitation in the mountains across the entire state is about 1.1 inches of precipitation. And you'll see here in a little bit that we have received that 1.1 inches of precipitation. Point being, we don't get very much precipitation this time of year. So a little bit can go a long way, but in the whole scheme of things, it's not as important as, an April, which receives on the order of about 3 inches of precipitation at most of the mountain sites. But we'll take it. I'm not trying to downplay the 138% of normal. You can see a lot of the individual sites here in the Gunnison did quite well for precipitation through June. Some above 200% of normal, 3 of them. However, year-to-date precipitation in the Gunnison is only 75% of normal. But you can see the bump that we received there and early to mid-June was a larger contributor to that 138% of normal so far. And then here we have streamflow forecasts quite low. Cochetoba Creek below Rock Creek, or Cochetoba Creek, yeah, below Rock Creek, excuse me, at 25% of normal. However, Tamichi is at 83, the Slate River at 74, and then some on the lower end of the Gunnison are in the 40s and 30s. Reservoir storage was above normal last month. However, this month for the combined reservoirs have dipped below normal now, and we'll get the exact numbers here at the end of the presentation. I'll hang on the reservoir slide. Moving into the San Miguel, Dolores, San Juan combined basins. Again, no snow here, even though it says 100%. Snowpack peak was pretty close to normal, which is great. But as Becky mentioned, we had a very dry fall, and we also had a dry spring. Even though you have a good snowpack on top of very dry soils, we get the runoff conditions that we're seeing here. The snowpack just doesn't always translate to exactly the kind of runoff that you wind up seeing. There's not a one-to-one correlation there for a whole bunch of reasons. One being a dry spring and dry fall. Excuse me. May precipitation in the combined San Miguel, Dolores, San Juan is only 23. However, June has turned things around at 125%. Again, this helps put that the 1.1 inches or the low June average precipitation. This helps put that in perspective. Again, here's that average, and here's where we're at. So we would need to get a little bit more to really start turning things around on the water year normal. Even if we had double June precipitation, it still really wouldn't put a dent in the drought that we're seeing right now. San Juans did receive pretty good precipitation. You can see there's a number of 200% of normals, 190% of normal there, especially at the very higher elevations of the San Juans. And that's what's driving that above normal June so far. However, year to date is only 71% of normal. Looking at the stream flow forecasts, in general, drier runoff expected in the western portion of the basins, however, slightly better in the eastern. You can see some of those values are 6% of normal, 5% of normal inflows into those reservoirs there. Unfortunately, and here, reservoir storage dipped below normal last month for the combined reservoirs in San Miguel, Dolores, and San Juan, and we've gone further down since last month. Into the Rio Grande, again, near normal, snowpack peak, a little bit early, and then an early melt off. We saw that in many basins, and it is just translated to things being very dry. May precipitation 40, June to date 100% of normal. And then here again, you can see the headwaters of the Rio Grande, the upper elevations of the San Juans got hit pretty good with some of that precipitation early to mid-June, but haven't gotten much since. I think that might have been one of those storms that Russ was talking about last month. He was talking about some good precipitation that was going to come in and then leave, and we were going to see dry conditions after that. And here again, quite a deficit. Much like Becky was saying, here we're about almost 10 inches short on precip in the upper Rio Grande with 65% of normal year-to-date precipitation. Streamflow forecasts, again, on the lower side, some in the 50s, a number of 60s in the headwaters. However, in the lower basin, which is typical for the Rio Grande, streamflow forecast lower in the 30s and 40s. Reservoir storage has dipped a good bit below normal at this point for the combined reservoirs in the Rio Grande. And again, it'll be interesting to show the statewide reservoir map. Here again, Arkansas snowpack is completely melted out. May precipitation was 56% of normal. However, June has been 110 so far. And again, some of the upper elevations in the Sangres have received relatively good precipitation. Even Glen Cove here received some pretty good precipitation. 76% of normal year-to-date precipitation in the combined Arkansas. And then streamflow forecasts pretty low on the lower end of the basin. And then some okay streamflow forecast, 80%, that's Salida, 83% I should say. Reservoir storage better here than in the Rio Grande and the combined reservoirs of the Arkansas. Okay, moving on to the state summary. Again, snowpack statewide, largely melted out. Peak was near normal. I wanted to put this in here to show how dry things were from April 1 through May 31st. And you can see some of the basin-wide numbers in the individual site values, where we just had some extremely dry conditions since April 1 through mid-May, or end of May, excuse me, and that's what drove a lot of those forecasts to drop sharply, the streamflow forecasts to drop sharply. Fortunately, June to date, precipitation across the state has been 100% of normal. However, May was just short of half of normal precipitation. And then here, the statewide map really shows that the majority of the precipitation since the beginning of June has fallen in the central portion of the state, in the central mountains, and then also hit the upper elevations of the San Juans quite well. However, the northern part of the state did not fare so well. However, the South Platte was able to take advantage of that. The Arkansas was able to take advantage of the precipitation that we saw in June, but I think that's one of the reasons why we saw the particularly low numbers June precipitation in the combined Yampa and White. Year-to-date precipitation across the state is 83% of normal. And excuse me, it's also 83, 84 different products put out very slightly different numbers. That's pretty close right there. So statewide, 83 or 84% of normal year-to-date precipitation as of yesterday morning. Northern part of the state, very close to normal. However, the southern part of the state is a bit drier since October 1. Excuse me. This is the streamflow forecast as reported by May 1 data. And then I wanted to show a comparison to this month. So that's the drop that we saw. I think the most notable drop was there in the South Platte. You know, stream flows were quite, antecedent stream flows were quite low. And then we had the very dry May, which played into that. So I think that's one of the main reasons why the streamflow forecast dropped as much as they did. And then we also saw that drop in the majority of the upper Colorado, the North Platte, and the Yampa White as well. Again, significantly dry conditions up there as well. Here's that statewide monthly reservoir storage map. Statewide reservoir storage is right at normal, 100%. But as is usually the case, we wind up seeing there's a diversity of different values across the state. So the southern half of the state, not quite so good. The Arkansas at 87%, the upper Rio Grande only at 62% of normal average reservoir storage, whereas the northern half of the state does have better reservoir storage. So it kind of balances it out across the state, giving us that 100% number. But definitely need to pay attention to the individual basins or even individual reservoirs for individual numbers of how much storage is available. And here we can see a better idea of reservoir trends. Reservoir storage has pretty much been trending downward statewide. You can see the larger drop off here in the upper Rio Grande. Another little bit of a significant, not quite as significant as the upper Rio Grande, but still a significant drop off in the Gunnison here, and then more consistent decreases in the South Platte and the Yampa White. Fortunately, the Colorado storage continues to trend upward as it pertains to the normal. So, and here's that statewide showing up right at normal now after trending downward over the last year on total statewide storage in our reservoirs. So summary, basically the near normal peak snowpack that we saw was pretty much entirely negated by the dry conditions that we had in the fall and the conditions that we also saw in the spring. Precipitation was well below normal through April and May. However, June has been a welcome reprieve in many of those areas that need it most, the San Juans and whatnot. However, that only came from one major storm, it appears. And while it has driven some above normal numbers through the course of June, we definitely need more precipitation to this point. Reservoir storage statewide is 100% of normal. That's great. However, we definitely need to keep an eye on those southern basins where reservoir storage is below normal. 87 in the Arc, 62 in the Rio Grande, and continuing to fall. And finally, streamflow forecasts have just trended downward quite sharply, again, because of the dry conditions. And it's something that we're going to have to continue to monitor. We're not going to be offering any more streamflow forecasts from the NRCS through the rest of the year, but we'll just be monitoring the streamflow values that we see on the gauges and whatnot. And that's all that I have.
Thanks, Brian. Does anyone have any questions for Brian reviewing those? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And that presentation to Ben, we'll get that uploaded to the website. And will you please pull up the agenda? Excuse me. Awesome. So now we can do a little round robin of our water providers and task force updates. Let's see. Ben, do you mind just listing off folks on the phone?
Yeah, it's let's see, Brian with Aurora. I think we have Christopher Whoop with Eagle River. John Orr is on the phone with us.
Yeah.
Denver Water, Jason with Denver Water. I think I saw Swiffen on the phone. There he is.
Okay. Why don't we just go ahead and start with Brian with Aurora?
Hi.
Hey.
Currently, Aurora storage is at 89% of capacity, which is normally this time of year we're at 82%, so we're doing pretty well. For those who don't know, that represents under normal demands about 2 3/4 years of supply for the city. Obviously, if we were in drought restrictions, we could stretch that out a little bit. Treatment year to date, water year to date is 118% of last year, which is and 107% of 2018. So we are running ahead of our average for this time of year.
Thanks. Any other concerns you're seeing?
Not really. I mean, we're concerned about the lack of precipitation, and our customers, I'm sure, as most other water providers are very much aware of, when it rains, we see a big drop in demand. So people are very much aware of precipitation events. So a couple of those, and we would be in better shape. One thing I'd like to comment quickly about streamflow forecasts. Denver Water, and Nathan could probably speak to this better than me, but they will be doing some work on the flume below 11 Mile Reservoir starting in August. And so they've requested that we limit our releases out of Spitty Mountain Reservoir during the time they're doing construction. And so streamflow through Cheeseman Canyon will probably be less than normal at end of the summer into the fall. So just a heads up.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian. That's helpful for our streamflow forecast information.
Okay. How about, let's see, who do we have? John, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. Production year to date is 11.38% above 2019. Things have dried out, and but now we're kind of in the normal kind of summer watering pattern. Sorry, I have to click over here. For some reason, sorry, we were at 84% of capacity the other day. The report's not opening up yet. The current report. Okay, I lied. We're at 88.3% now, and that's pretty normal for us this time of year. We usually fill. Stanley Lake filled in May, and the partners were just matching production until the call went a little bit senior on the South Platte. And so there's water being called by the Farmers Highline Canal right now. So we expect that Stanley Lake will be dropping throughout the summer from now on. And let's see, I think that's it. Our concerns, of course, like everyone, is that it has not been raining, and that bumps our demand. And so, but anyway, we have no real concerns. We're going to hit July without worrying about watering restrictions. There are no plans at this time. And that's my report.
Okay. How about Swithin? Or Denver Water, Jason or Nathan?
Can you hear me? This is Swithin.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So for Highlands Ranch, our storage is about 20% below normal. Our demands are running 8 to 9% above normal since April, the end of April. We have started our groundwater. I'm sorry, I got an echo here. Groundwater pumping end of April. That has continued. We're supplying our district with about 20-25% of deep groundwater. Really, it's a concerning year, but not worried. Next year will be conditions continue to be more of a concern for us.
Okay, thanks. Denver Water? Oh.
maybe this will work now, is getting some feedback. This is Nathan with Denver Water. Our storage is currently 95% full. That's normal for this time of year. We'd typically be 95% full. We're expecting our peak storage to be somewhere between 96 and 97% full, so not quite full. Our South Platte reservoirs, Cheeseman, Marston, and Chatfield are struggling to fill a little bit. We don't think we'll quite fill Cheeseman. On the west slope, we're full at Dillon and Williams Fork, and then our Moffett collection system, Gross and Ralston, are also currently full. For May, we saw demands that were 139% of normal. So far for June, our demand is 108% of normal, and our year-to-date is 108% of normal. We are concerned a bit with the lack of precipitation, but overall our storage is good for this year, and we are on our summer watering rules, which are in effect from May 1st to October 1st. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Isabel?
Hi, this is Isabel at Broomfield. We, kind of similar to the other municipalities, we saw a big jump in demand in May with the warm weather and people starting to irrigate. I think May was higher than just higher than 2018, and definitely higher than the last 5-year average. So, we're expecting our demands to be above normal for the rest of the summer as well. So we're trying to prepare for that. I think that's probably it.
Okay. Water providers on the phone that I've missed. I'm looking through the list here.
Hi, this is Emily with Northern Water. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can. Go ahead, Emily.
Hey, just a quick update. We increased our quota from 70% to 80%, effective July 1st due to the hot and dry conditions. For storage, Carter's at 95%, Horsetooth is at 98%, Willow Creek is at 83%, Granby is at 98%. Granby's a little over a foot from filling. We are still hoping to fill it, but we're not sure if it's going to happen, but we'll see what happens in the near future. And that's it.
Thank you for that update. Anyone, let's see, from CPW, maybe Ryan, are you able to give any updates on wildlife concerns or impacts, looking at the conditions for the year? Put you on the spot there.
I noticed Rob Harris from CPW as well. I thought maybe one of them might be able to speak to if they're seeing any wildlife impacts due to the drought.
This is Rob. Thanks. Yeah, unfortunately I'm not one of our fantastic wildlife folks, so I'm the water section supervisor. So mostly I would say what we've seen is a number of calls on our more junior reservoirs in our state parks, and so we're working on several substitute water supply plans right now to try to keep those legal. So that's been, I would say, maybe the most acute piece of this dry year for us so far.
Hi, this is Ryan. I can add a little bit to Rob's report. This is Ryan Untrainer, Southwest Region Water Specialist. Just in the Southwest region, so the areas that I work in, the Rio Grande Basin, Gunnison Basin, San Juan Basin, just seeing lower than normal stream flows across all basins. Not seeing any impacts to the aquatic riverine systems yet, but as the summer moves on and into the fall, certainly there will be some concerns. Might be some concerns locally in the San Juan Basin with some of the fires and the burn scars. Just keeping an eye on those situations. Some sensitive fish populations in some of those watersheds that we're monitoring in case we need to rescue some fish. That's all I have.
Thanks, Ryan and Rob. Other folks on the phone that have any, sector or even just local regional impact reports that they would like to share broadly?
Hi, this is Chris Wolf up here in Vail, Colorado. Eagle River Water and Sanitation. We're slowly watching the trend lines go down, as we've all kind of seen on the Gore and Eagle River, which are our primary water sources up here. Our reservoirs are kind of split between a number of different groups, but they seem to be holding pretty well. We are seeing an uptick in demand, primarily because the irrigation season is upon us. We are also seeing tourists start to come back up to the area. So we're seeing indoor demand increasing as well, which went down during the COVID lockdowns that were really prohibitive to people coming from different locations, whether that's Front Range communities or even states around Colorado. So that's kind of what's going on up here. It's been kind of cool. So that's at least a benefit to us here up at higher elevation, but we are definitely concerned and we're already prepping for drought just in case. So that's the update from Vail.
Thanks, Chris. Just open for anyone else who would like to report. Kevin Hauk, I saw you're on. Anyone with DPS? I don't think so. I know there have been some reports of a few small fires each day. Marianne Goodland just entered in the chat. Yes, happy to let people know that Marianne is a reporter and on the line here. Thanks for being on this call, Marianne. So if we don't have any further just impact reports, you're always welcome to share those. The Colorado Climate Center also has a great just log of local reporting. I check those fairly often just to see what people are saying in the fields. But the biggest update, which I alluded to at the beginning here, it's not quite been released. I've had, while we're on this call, some emails coming through of when a press release will go out today. But in short, the governor's office has approved this water availability task force and the drought task force review and recommendation to activate the drought plan, as well as activating the agricultural impact task force. So that recommendation and memo that many of you on this call reviewed, thank you, has been approved, and there should be a press release and the memo going out let's see, 10 minutes ago, I got an email that said momentarily. So thank you all for your contributions to both reviewing that memo and just you know, the calls and check-ins and the time it takes to do so in between these meetings, these monthly meetings. There will, I'm sure, be, you know, several follow-ups to resources that CWCB and other agencies are working to develop to support drought plan activation. Primarily, activation of the drought plan calls for within 7 to 10 days, the drought task force meeting again to decide next steps and really laying out a plan for reviewing impacts. And it's not something that, you know, creates a big uproar by any means. Drought is probably the least of our worries in 2020, but the primary concerns we're hearing around the state is very clearly going to be the fire season this year, the availability of, you know, volunteer firefighters and just sanitary conditions, and making sure that that's a safe place for our first responders. And it'll be interesting, but I am all ears to whoever you know, wants to reach out to me directly. You can send a message to Ben, myself, or Tracy if there are specific resources that you either personally or the communities that you represent would find helpful. I'm all ears on what those resources might be, and trying this past weekend pull together a big list of funding, you know, funding mechanisms, and looking to see between state funding and federal funding which of those programs are even available at the moment, considering our state budget challenges. So lots of added layers this year to responding to drought, but the thing is, we've got time to pull together resources, and we'd rather hear sooner rather than later if there are serious concerns in more acute areas around the state, that we can support partnerships and pull together resources to support each other. So that's just kind of my general spiel. Is my email and phone are always available to you all. That said, does anyone have any thoughts right now of the primary resources you'd like to see in the near future?
Hey Megan, this is Tracy. I just wanted, what's that?
I said hi.
Hi. I just wanted to add to what you just said, that you know, one of the things that you've already started working on is pulling together some of the financial resources that are available. A lot of those are available to agricultural producers, and in addition to resources available through the state, a lot of resources are already available through federal programs to ag producers. A lot of the counties have already been designated as federal drought disaster counties, and so that opens up that funding. And I know in the past, this list of resources that you're working on right now, Megan, was a really useful thing for those ag producers. And so I think just for folks to know that that's going to be available again this year here pretty shortly. I wanted to ask you, Megan, too, CWCB has their drought webpage. Is that going to be, do you know, is that going to be the main sort of landing page, or kind of the central repository for resources related to, okay.
Yes, you beat me to the punch there. I actually just pasted that link into the chat. So the drought page that's on our new CWCB website, there's not a whole lot on there right now. This was a carryover from our, obviously from our old site, but we are working to get some resources and links to that funding document, and even just a list of indicators to follow, and really be the primary page that folks can reference throughout the season. And I will throughout the season and just continually be adding resources to that drought page. So if there's articles or things that you think you'd like to share with us, we can circulate even links to other articles for folks. So that will be the main repository of information. And yes, Tracy, we can definitely link to the DWR page through the CWCB page. Any, what time? We're at 10:50 here. So got plenty of time if there are open questions, and or any, concerns, curiosities we can address while we're all here, or we can have a half hour back. Angie says, where can we find the memo that was sent to the governor's office? That's going to be directly linked through the press release that will go out to CWCB's entire email listserv. So that will be accessible through the press release. I mean, since we've been on the phone, we got that memo linking to it, so it's well, just not quite fully public yet. Does that help, Angie? I can also send it to you directly if I believe you're on the listserv, but we can make sure. Great. Okay, folks, that's all we have. Ben or Tracy, do you have anything else to add before we send people off?
Not for me, thank you.
Not for me.
Okay, thanks to our presenters, really helpful updates, and we'll be in touch about presentations.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.